League. I'm going to start recording now, just so you know, so we can save this on our website for later. This morning, we're going to be tackling blight in Pennsylvania for the Pennsylvania Economy League's Issues Forum, brought to you by the Central Division Pennsylvania Economy League. We are the state's leading nonpartisan, nonprofit policy research organization, founded more than 85 years ago. We provide technical assistance and consulting to local government. We conduct independent research on issues impacting our communities, and we foster good government through forums like this one, as well as our weekly email newsletter. I want to thank our board and our members for their ongoing support for the work that we do. A few ground rules before we get started today. Everybody is entering the session on mute, and we ask that you stay on mute just to be able to facilitate the speakers. And to make the question and answer session go smoothly, we're asking that people please use the chat function to submit any questions that they have for the speakers. We're going to start out this morning with Senator Argall, who I'll introduce here in a second, and then we'll be following up with Phyllis Chamberlain, as well as our other speakers here this morning who I'll introduce. We're talking about blight, and we're excited to have these three distinguished speakers with us today. First up, we have State Senator Argall, who represents Schuylkill and parts of Berks County. He's chair of the State Government Committee, vice chair for Community and Economic and Recreational Development, and serves on several other committees, including Appropriations, Finance, Health, and Human Service. In addition to his work in the Senate, he's also a part-time college instructor and teaches aptly public policy. His top legislative priorities include promoting job growth, eliminating the school property tax burden on homeowners, and revitalizing downtown and older industrial areas. He led the successful fight to pass anti-blight legislation. He earned a bachelor's degree from Lycoming College. He also earned a master's and his PhD in public administration from Penn State. Senator Argall, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Oh, and thanks for the invitation to join you. I'm here in Monoy City, and Mary Beth Doherty, who has probably, is it fair to say you know more about blight, Mary Beth, than any other staffer in the Senate history between working for me and my predecessor, Senator Rhodes. And so she'll kick me if I get any of the facts wrong. But you know, one of the most important things I learned in grad school was Miles's Law. I remember it because it's easy to remember. It's where you sit. I almost messed it up. Where you stand depends on where you sit. And so sitting here in Monoy City in the middle of northern Schuylkill County, I think you can understand why anyone in my role would have to spend time in dealing with blight. And so in terms of whether I'm in Pottsville or in the new part of the district, in Hazleton, in another new part of the district in Jim Thorpe, which has seen amazing revitalization, blight is going to be an issue for us every day. I've now chaired the statewide bicameral bipartisan task force on blight for many years. And you know, the first goal that we had was to reach out to folks and with a simple point that this is an issue, whether you live in some of the most congested, largest population neighborhoods in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, or in some of the small towns in Pennsylvania. Someone from Levittown pointed out to me a long time ago that if your community suffered pretty significant job loss or economic decline in any way, the loss of the coal mine, the loss of the steel mill, there is going to be blight. It's not just a Philadelphia problem. It's also, of course, not just a Republican problem or a Democrat problem. Blight doesn't care if the neighborhood votes red or blue. And we've made some pretty considerable progress since the early days with those basic principles. We listened to a lot of folks, and the real, I think, first successes came in 2010 with the Neighborhood Blight Reclamation and Revitalization Act, local permit denial for bad actors, a personal asset attachment. We learned very quickly that, you know, some people are willing to obey the law and some people aren't. When they get their assets attached, then you've got their attention. We also allowed the right for local communities to extradite someone from out of state. I think Hazleton was one of the first communities to take advantage of that effort. And so we understood that local communities needed more tools in their toolbox. We created, through the House, the Senate, the governor, land banks. We increased the penalties for housing code avoidance. We reduced the amount of time that a purchaser of a building with violations had to correct the violations or demolish the property. We expedited foreclosure because we understood that under the previous law, some tax sales could take 540 days. There's a lot of bad things that can happen to a community and that property in 540 days. The goal was to cut it about in half. And so we also came across, I've learned some interesting things, never heard of a zombie property before, but when no one is willing to accept the responsibility for cutting the grass or fixing the broken window, again, bad things can happen to that neighborhood. We required pre-registration for bidders at tax sales, including LLCs and corporations. And what we learned is that, you know, many of these communities, such as the one that I'm sitting in now, have seen some pretty serious declines in population. And so when homes sit vacant, they fall into disrepair, they stop paying their property taxes. Again, bad things can happen. Just here in Monoy City and Shenandoah, we have over 800 properties at some stage right now in the delinquent tax sale process. Representative Twardzik and I were very happy to find $1 million for demolition a couple of years ago to bring back home for Schuylkill County demolition. And we felt really good about that until our first meeting here in Monoy City, when the Borough Council told us they need $15 million for demolition just in this one town. Schuylkill County, of course, has 67 different communities. And so, you know, just to give you some kind of an idea of the scale of the issue in front of us. We also place laws to prevent negligent and unscrupulous property owners from buying new properties while their existing properties were already in a serious state of disrepair or are tax delinquent. And so we tried to come at this from a couple of different angles. And again, we felt like we were continually closing loopholes, talking to people on city council, talking to borough managers, saying, okay, you know, how is the new law working? What else can you do? And we learned that unfortunately, some negligent owners try to circumvent these laws by using, you know, different community corporate names when purchasing properties at delinquent tax sales. And now, because of Act 33, everyone, for the first time, including corporations and LLCs, will have to disclose the names and contact information when registering to bid at a tax sale, including corporate officers. County tax claim bureaus are now required to send the list of pre-registered bidders to every municipality in the county in advance. This gives them the opportunity to review records, to look for potential bidders, to make sure that they don't have delinquent municipal accounts such as water and sewage. Again, trying to give local communities more tools in the toolbox to stop the blight from continuing to grow. We also heard, of course, at one of our meetings said, hey, all these tools are great. We need money. And so in 2016, the House and the Senate and the governor came together to pass Act 152, which for the first time gave counties the ability to add up to a $15 fee on all the deeds and mortgages that are filed in that county to be used just for demolition. The idea being that if the fee is raised in Schuylkill County, every dollar stays in Schuylkill County. That's true for all 67 counties. Here in Schuylkill County, it brings in about $137,000 a year. Not a great amount of money, but again, year after year after year, it allows the county commissioners to begin to whack away at the program. Down in, of course, Delaware County is much larger. there it brings in almost $500,000 each year. If I do this right, this can show you which counties, the yellow counties are those counties that have taken advantage of the bill. The white counties have chosen not to. And so if you have blight in your county and you're not colored yellow on this map, you might want to talk to your county commissioner. We notice every year or two, a couple more counties come on. Right now, 24 out of the 67 counties have enacted the 152 fee. We also are now moving to remove the 10-year sunset that's included in the law. The Senate passed it overwhelmingly. I'm hoping that we get a passage out of the House because we understand this problem isn't going to go away in just a couple more years. We're also looking at some other ways to bring in some new dollars for demolition, for rehab. Senator Brewster, one of my Democratic colleagues from Allegheny County, has introduced Senate Bill 574, which would give counties the ability to add up to a $250 fee on properties sold at tax sale or foreclosure, again, for demolition for rehab. That passed the Senate to 48-2. It's now awaiting action in the House. I've often said that Blight has done some amazing things in Harrisburg. It's actually encouraged Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate and the governor to all work together. Not always the case, you might have noticed from some other news accounts. But again, on Blight, party line, fortunately, doesn't seem to matter. And we get the bill passed regardless of whose name is at the top. We're going to continue our efforts to not just eradicate the existing blight, but we are now working on a budget proposal that I hope you'll see some action on in the next couple of weeks to actually stop it before it starts. Several of you are familiar with Senator Saval's bill. Senator Saval, from a relatively new Democratic member from Philadelphia, has introduced Senate Bill 1135, which is the whole home repair initiative, with the idea that if we can't help people to stay in their homes, we understand again what happens when that house sits empty. And so whether it's a senior citizen or a struggling family, we're looking for ways to help them to continue to maintain their home before it falls into disrepair. We believe this will help some of our most vulnerable households who are now residing in unsafe and unhealthy homes. These are the homes, these are the people that we need to help. And so the last thing that we want to see is the list of blighted properties continue to grow. We're trying to get it to shrink. We do have a pretty significant budget surplus this year. Senator Saval is hoping for several $100 million to aid this new initiative. We'll see where the final number is. All I can tell you at this point is to stay tuned, but we're doing our best to get that number to be as high as possible. Again, this is not one that's going to have any one size fits all answer, but I think you've seen some good progress. We've had some real grassroots leadership from many of you on this issue from across the state. The task force will continue to meet. The task force will continue to listen. I'm staying on the line today to hear any new suggestions you have. Just in case Mary Beth doesn't have enough work to do, we'll always add a couple more things to her list. And so again, thanks for having me. And I'm here for the rest of the morning.
Thank you very much for joining us, Senator Argall, and thank you for your remarks. Just a reminder, we'll take Q&A following all three of the speakers. And also, please help us out to make the Q&A go smoothly by submitting any of your questions via the chat function at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer. Our next speakers are Phyllis Chamberlain from the Housing Alliance of PA and Winnie Branton from Branton Strategies. Phyllis is the executive director of the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, which is a statewide membership organization with a mission to ensure that all Pennsylvanians, especially those with low incomes, have access to safe, decent, affordable, and accessible homes. She leads advocacy efforts at the state and federal levels to increase funding and improve policy to increase affordable housing opportunities for low-income Pennsylvanians. She has 20 years of experience in public policy advocacy, community engagement, and communications, with most of her time spent at local, state, and federal planning and policy to increase affordable housing opportunity and end homelessness. We also have Winnie Branton from Branton Strategies joining us. She is a consultant, attorney, and author. She's a president and founder of Branton Strategies and helps communities develop and implement effective and innovative strategies for preventing, remediating, and redeveloping vacant and blighted properties. Winnie literally wrote the book on land banks. She wrote the Pennsylvania Land Bank Resource Guide, a how-to manual for forming and operating a land bank in Pennsylvania. This is published by the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, and the purpose of the guide is to provide community leaders, government staff, and elected officials with the self-help resources to assess whether a land bank is right for their community, and if so, how to proceed. With that, I will turn it over to Winnie and Phyllis. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. And thanks to the PA Economy League for hosting this forum and for inviting us here today. So the Housing Alliance, as you just heard, is a statewide nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we're dedicated to increasing resources and creating a priority on making our communities places of prosperity for all. To make our communities prosperous, we need to make a home within reach for all Pennsylvanians. And the first step is often to address the issue of blight, the prevalence of vacant, abandoned, and tax delinquent properties. And that's why we have been working on this issue for so many years. So over the course of the last decade, I think it's actually been much longer than that, we here at the Housing Alliance have partnered with the state legislature, much of it under Senator Argall's leadership, to create a state policy framework that provides municipalities, counties, and others with more authorities and tools to combat blight. And you just heard Senator Argall talk about a lot of those authorities that were created via state law. Once thought of as an insurmountable problem, there are now quite a robust and comprehensive set of strategies to prevent and remediate the issue. And that's what we're going to focus on in mine and mostly Winnie's remarks today. The Housing Alliance advocates for funding and for improved policy. And we also work with a network of experts, primarily Winnie, from whom you're about to hear speak about the tools that exist and the tools that we still need. The legislature has been a really great partner in listening to individuals that are on the front lines. And that's how so many of these tools have been created. But of course, we know that there's more to be done. And we look forward to partnering with you all, Senator Argall, and other members of the legislature to create additional tools and funding to prevent and remediate blight. So I'm going to ask Winnie a series of questions, and we're going to do a little bit of a back and forth here. And Winnie, again, is going to talk about the tools that are available in a little more detail, so that if you're not utilizing those tools, you might think about how they may apply to your local situation. And then here at the Housing Alliance, we do have several resources available, and Winnie's going to point you to those additional resources for further exploration. So Winnie, my first question for you is to introduce yourself, and then also talk about what are some of the basic tools that municipalities should have to deal with blighted properties, regardless of the size of the municipality, because we know that some municipalities have less capacity than others.
Thanks, Phyllis. And yeah, good morning, everyone. I have been so happy over the last 6 or 7 years to work with the Housing Alliance on blight and land banking and trying to help local governments figure out which tools would work for them. And as Senator Argall mentioned, the issue of blight is not limited. It's urban, suburban, and rural, and it's all over the state. But when we talk about blight, one of the first things I do when I go to community is make sure that people are all leading from the same understanding of what a blighted property is. So here it just shows some of the general legal criteria that you would need when you talk about a property that's blighted. Some communities use a less formal definition and try to use one that's not so legalese, but this kind of tells you a little bit about what needs to be there for a property to be considered blighted. A lot of it has to do with public nuisances, no utilities, unfit for human habitation, but these are just some of those criteria that it's important to think about as you're defining blight and trying to figure out how to solve that blighted property problem in your community. So one of the first things that helps is to quantify the blight that you have, or have some idea of what the nature and extent of blight is. And over the course of the conversation this morning, I'm going to share some examples from communities in Pennsylvania. And one of those examples here is the city of Sharon. And what I like to say is you don't have to have a whole pot of money. It's great to have it, but try to use the resources that you have. And some communities in Pennsylvania have been great examples of how to do this. And one of those is the city of Sharon, where they use resident volunteers to create this blight inventory or property conditions map so that they would have a better understanding of which properties are abandoned, which are good, which need a little improvement, so that you can use that data to inform the tools that you should be looking for. In the city of Sharon, there's a population of 13,000. It's in Mercer County. And at the end of the day, they found that there were 350 houses that were apparently abandoned. But they also found that, you know, most of the houses were in good condition or fair condition, and only 344 of them were poor. There were, the final map had like 5,300 parcels evaluated. Next, like some big picture issues. When you're trying to eliminate blight, you need that legal framework, you need targeted resources and collaboration with partners. And your goal is to change the culture to improve compliance. It would be great if everyone complied with the property maintenance code, the building codes, and all the other laws that impact how communities look and how they treat their properties in the built environment. And then if you can't get compliance, you got to have a tool in place to transfer those worst properties to new owners. So when we talk about the tools, Phyllis's first question was, you know, what tools that do municipalities need? It's good to think of them in terms of two buckets. Those that prevent and eliminate blight and keep properties up to code. And then the other ones that look at long-term vacant and abandoned blighted properties that are needed to get those properties into the hands of a new owner. So for the ones that most municipalities should have, I highlighted the ones here. You need to have some kind of a property maintenance code, whether it's the IPMC or, you know, simple ordinances that define a public nuisance, how high grass can be, that you can't have junk cars in your front yard. You can tailor the ordinances to meet the community needs and the political will there and to regulate property conditions. Another key tool that municipalities are using is quality of life ticketing for common code violations. It's like a parking ticket rather than like a summary offense. You use those when you get further along in the process. The tax sale bidder disqualification has been a great tool for municipalities, especially with Act 33. The pre-registration of bidders for judicial sales is really helping municipalities understand who's registered to bid, and then they have an opportunity to notify the county and say, wait a second, 3 of these bidders on here had their landlord licenses revoked. Don't allow them to bid. And under the real estate tax sale law, those bidders are disqualified, but you need to know who they are going in. And this Act 33 has really been a great help for local governments. And then the last, again, is for the severely blighted properties, you need those tools that Senator Argall mentioned under Act 90, permit denials, the ability to attach assets, and then to bring criminal charges if the violations are really, really strong. The next one is addressing the long-term vacant. You need a demolition program, right? Senator Argall talked about Act 152, the demolition fund. That has been a real resource for communities that are looking for demo funding. Other than CDBG dollars, and that's community development block grant dollars from the federal government, and general funds from the legislature, there are little pots of money, but the Act 152 demo funds gives counties the option to create that by adding that $15 fee for recording. The next one is condemnation or eminent domain. You need some way to acquire those properties and transfer them to new owners. Some communities use a blighted property review committee to do that, to go through the formal process of designating a property as blighted and then condemning the property using eminent domain to acquire those properties and then transfer them to new owners. The other two tools on here, conservatorship and land banks. Conservatorship is a legal process. It's for one property, individual properties that are blighted that you can try to bring up to code. And then land banks are a more at scale, community-based tool for acquiring, managing, and marketing vacant, abandoned, and tax delinquent properties. So I think those are the basic ones that communities should look at. Make sure that you have some basic tools to prevent blight, to eliminate blight, and then transfer the properties to new owners if they're in such serious condition that the new owner, the existing owner, won't comply.
So the next question for Winnie is, how do we convince elected officials at the local level and community stakeholders to take some action, particularly given that blight can actually be very expensive?
Yeah, so my first response to that is to tell a story that highlights what comes after the blight, right? We've all seen picture after picture of what a blighted structure looks like, but to get communities and elected officials really engaged, you need to talk about the opportunities posed by those properties. What could they be used for? How could they benefit us? So there's three approaches that are listed here. The budgetary approach, you know, what is the cost of blight and doing nothing? We've lost these tax revenues, and by returning these properties, we'll have more revenues. And then the economic approach, like some businesses aren't going to expand or move into your community because they don't like the way it looks. Their people won't want to live there because of the blighted properties. And then the loss of household wealth of your residents. Having blighted properties nearby really decreases the value of your property. So that has an impact on household wealth. And then the humanistic approach is the stories of the occupied blighted properties. Senator Argall mentioned the whole home repairs bill. There are some occupied blighted properties in Pennsylvania that really need some investment in order to bring those properties up to code and to make them safe and healthy places to live. Some of the other things, like you want to educate the decision makers. So how do you do that? You define the problem, you show how the strategy can help, you focus on the cost of doing nothing, and then you share success stories from other communities. So here, defining the problem. In Altoona, they did a property condition survey, and they noticed that there were like almost 5,000 properties that were in need of some support. So from that data, they decided to look closer at their home repair grant and loan program. The next one, focus on the cost of doing nothing. The Tri-Cog communities, it was about 41 municipalities in Allegheny County. They did a blight financial impact of blight study to just show how much money is already being spent on blighted properties and what are those costs, so that people can get some sense of what they're already spending on blight. So why not address those blighted properties and not have to spend these dollars, but spend them on the redevelopment and reimagining of these properties. And then the sharing of success stories. I mean, you show how it's working in other places. And here's just an example, and I'll go to the Westmoreland County Land Bank. You had weak market, you had demolitions, and you have vacant lots. So what do you do with all the vacant lots that result from demolition? You figure out uses. And here they partnered with Keep Pennsylvania Beautiful, and they started this, created lots of love. And here's just one example of that. and you see that it's really community driven and based on local conditions. Like, it's not going to work everywhere, and you need to understand your community and listen to the community in order to figure out which tools are going to work best to solve the problems as they see them. The other, I'm going to go back one. Sorry about that. I jumped ahead. Positive messaging. Again, what comes after the blight is removed. And this property is similar to many that we've seen, but you want to talk about opportunity, revitalization, renewal, housing, green space, business expansions in order to do that. So here's one example from the city of Bethlehem. They took this blighted property that was the Goodman Theater in Bethlehem, and they were working using conservatorship to transform it into this mixed use development. And this is just one example of how you use before and after pictures to get people excited, because you want to try to steer clear of using a lot of text when you're trying to engage, and look at pictures and try to get people to imagine what these spaces could look like. So some communication strategies, again, you don't want to talk in technical language. You want to combine the data with personal stories, more graphics, know your audience. In some places, the real concern is we want more revenue, like we need more tax revenue. So we want to focus on that piece. And other places, they're more interested in the occupied blight and how we're going to help folks that are living there. So you have to know your audience and then figure out what would appeal to them to get them engaged and get them working on this issue. But you also want to manage expectations, and because this is hard, right? We've learned that it's taken like a decade plus to get tools in place. The tools are being used, but it's still very hard because we really value property rights in Pennsylvania. So we don't want to take over control of folks' properties or impose undue restrictions on their use of properties. So we have to balance that, and that can sometimes get complicated. And you want to share your success stories.
So in terms of sharing success stories, which was one of your main points, do you have other examples that people can refer to when thinking about building the case for taking action on this in their own community?
Yeah, I have a few slides that do that. The first one, I wanted to pull up Act 152 because it's really easy to find data on this, because all the reports are on DCED's website. So every community that has a demolition fund has to file a report. And so I pulled up the 2021 Delaware County report, and they reported collecting $774,000 in revenue in 2021. They also have to report how many structures were demolished, what the balance is. So here, in the same year that they were collecting all that revenue, they demolished 6 structures. It cost them about $200,000, and they have 14 additional structures in the pipeline. But this was before they received this really big increase in their demo fund, and it's because of the strong real estate market. So those demo funds are building revenue, providing resources for taking those dangerous structures down. So that's one which I really encourage counties to put this ordinance in place and establish these demo funds. Another one is to do a blight inventory. I shared City of Sharon. City of Greensburg blight inventory is another good one to look at if you're trying to get folks engaged on, counting the blight or evaluating your property conditions. You don't have to do it citywide. Some places will do it just by a neighborhood or by a target area. The city of Erie has also done this. There are many examples across the state how people do it. Sometimes they do it with professional staff. Greensburg had some help from the county planning department, but others use residents and trained interns. City of Washington did it using a variety of folks to do the blight and property conditions inventory. Some other things that go to blight prevention, Canonsburg Borough has a great website for its code enforcement. And here you look at pre-sale inspections. It's for rental properties and owner-occupied properties. There's one inspection when there's a transfer. This is less than doing like a rental property registration and licensing program, which it requires resources and capacity that some municipalities don't have. So the pre-sale inspection is one way to have access to properties before they transfer, so that you can see whether or not there are things that need to be corrected to keep that property safe and healthy. Other places, if you were interested in seeing rental property registration programs, there's examples from Allentown, from Harrisburg, and from the city of Erie are some good examples. The land bank, which is really my love, I'll say it right out. I love land banks. I love talking about land banks and figuring out how to use them for this problem. And so a couple examples from there. Dauphin County was the first land bank to be created in Pennsylvania. They partner with Habitat for Humanity to create affordable housing. And this is just one example of the rehab they did in Steelton Borough. The next land bank example I want to show you is from the Northeast PA Land Bank. This is the City of Pittston's Redevelopment Authority, and Joe Chack, the executive director. I was in a panel with him recently, and he shared one of these slides where land banks have this special power to priority bid at judicial sales, which means they don't have to be the highest bidder. They can negotiate the acquisition of properties on the judicial sale list in advance, and then those properties get transferred to the land bank with all the benefits of judicial sale, meaning it's free and clear, but they also are able to get them at a discounted price, usually the minimum bid price, which is equal to the county's cost of bringing that property to tax sale, which is advertising, some other administrative fees, but usually like between $1,500 and $2,500, let's say. So here they used the first use of their priority bid power was back in 2019, and they acquired 11 properties across 4 municipalities. This land bank is another example of the regional approach, multi-municipal, not just looking at your own municipality, but trying to go bigger so that you can have greater capacity and greater impact. So the other way to do this, to acquire these long-term vacant blighted properties, is through the use of a blighted property review committee and eminent domain. In 2018, you'll see here the Erie Redevelopment Authority used their blighted property review committee and eminent domain to acquire, they initiated the process to acquire 28 properties. And here, another example of multiple agencies working together: the BPRC, the land bank, the 2 land banks, the City of Erie's land bank, the Erie County land bank. All of those agencies work together on blight, and they figure out which agency has the tools needed to address an individual property. And that really is another great example. For eminent domain, though, the proceedings can be costly, and the acquisition should be pursued strategically. It's not something that you would go down that path lightly. So look at your other tools before you go here. Lastly, I want to talk about municipal use of misdemeanor criminal charges. There's a failure to comply with the code requirement, and there's the ability to impose first degree and then second degree misdemeanor convictions if you have multiple convictions for the same code violation, where there's been no activity to abate the violations, and it threatens public health and safety. So that sounds like an easy opportunity to move forward with criminal charges, but you have to remember that for the municipalities, sometimes it's the county DA that has the power. In fact, it's the county DA that has the power to bring criminal charges. So when you want to go this route, you often have to, if you're a municipality, you have to partner with your county DA. So in Altoona, they worked out an arrangement with the Blair County DA to have its solicitor appointed assistant district attorney in order to pursue these criminal misdemeanor charges related to code enforcement. Because remember, the county DA has a lot of responsibilities, and often they're overwhelmed with other criminal activity and criminal matters. So having the ability to appoint solicitors as assistant DAs was, I thought, a good way to try to move forward on using these tools that the legislature has provided.
So you've talked a lot about all the tools and some great examples of how they're being used. So as we've said a few times, certainly there are additional tools that are needed. Winnie, can you talk a little bit about some of those additional tools? And, you know, Senator Argall already talked about listening. And I will say Senator Argall has really taken the input from people all across the state and made it and has changed state policy. So he's listening, the Housing Alliance is listening to your additional suggestions for what's needed. But Winnie, why don't you talk a little bit about some of the tools that we know we still need?
Right. So there, again, I want to look and think about it in terms of those three approaches or three buckets again. Prevention, blight prevention, blight elimination, and then transferring those vacant abandoned properties. So first, I would say it would be great if there were more incentives for regional or multi-municipal code enforcement. In one state, and I can't remember which state it is, they were talking about giving the option to counties with the approval of the local governments to formalize that so that the counties could be more instrumental in helping local governments with code enforcement activities. I know in Westmoreland County, the Land Bank and Redevelopment Authority recently hosted a blight boot camp. And again, that goes to the listening. It was a great half day of talking with code enforcement officials, elected officials, city staff, and others that work on blight to learn how they could work together and share best practices and resources. So for me, I mean, I like to think about multi-municipal code enforcement, regional code enforcement. The Turtle Creek COG is a good example. I think I saw Amanda Settlemyer on this on this program, and she has developed a multi-municipal code enforcement program that I think can be a model. There are other COGs that are working with their local governments to try to help them build capacity, share resources with ordinances. So for me, that would be great. So figure out how can we incentivize local governments and COGs to work more regionally, and what would that look like? I don't know if it's dollars or if it's some other incentive, but I really would like to see that. And I know that builds capacity and it helps to have a greater impact. Others would be, I want to think about what comes after the blight. There have been a number of laws that have provided redevelopment incentives, like LRTA and other tax abatement programs that have come into to use over the past couple of years, especially. But assessing those and see which ones are working, like to see if those tools are actually, in fact, bringing resources there. I think the city of Erie was doing that in connection with their LRTA program, but to see which ones are really working and then try to replicate those across Pennsylvania. So getting back to their prevention, again, that whole homes repair program, we see it over and over again that it's not that these owner occupants and landlords don't want to comply. The economics just don't work for them. They don't have the resources themselves to make the repairs. And for landlords, if it's not economically viable for them to make the repairs and they're going to lose money doing it, it's unrealistic to think that they're going to just do the repairs out of the goodness of their heart. So trying to figure out how to get resources, whether it's dollars or again, listening to find out what they need. Through the Housing Alliance, I've been working with Phyllis in a couple of communities to talk to landlords about what kind of support they need to make them provide additional rental properties for folks that have subsidies. So trying, again, listening and learning what communities need in order to do it. But the big issue always goes back to funding, right? There's a need for more resources to support code enforcement in particular, because that is the foundation of blight work. It's that property maintenance code and code enforcement where you can use those tools to both prevent blight by doing your inspections and your property condition surveys, but then also to mitigate blight if necessary through all the tools and resources that come through that property maintenance code. Phyllis, I know there are other things on the policy agenda. When I went back and looked at the policy agenda from 2018 and saw that a lot of those have been achieved, right? So getting the pre-registration of bidders is great. The additional incentives for developing blighted properties are great. So I think there's tweaks that need to be out there. There's a couple of bills that are pending that go to land banks. Again, one is to allow land banks to have a virtual quorum, because with COVID, we learned that having virtual quorums really was helpful, especially where there's a county land bank and there's big distances between members. So that's one that's pending. Another one is to provide greater environmental liability protection for land banks that are not redevelopment authorities, and then to allow land banks to actually be petitioners for conservatorship. Right now, redevelopment authorities, nonprofits, and municipalities can bring conservatorship actions, but land banks cannot. So just to build out a little bit of the land bank's additional powers so that that tool can be used more effectively.
Great. Thanks so much, Winnie. So that is the end of our presentation. So LeeAnne, I will pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Winnie and Phyllis, for all your information and insight. We are also watching the chat, and I see that there are several requests for the resources that have been mentioned here today. We will post a recording of this session as well as the resources and links to the PEL website, which is pelcentral.org. So www.pelcentral.org. Also remember, please submit any questions that you have for Winnie, Phyllis, or Senator Argall in the chat function. I also want to introduce Lynne Shedlock from the Pennsylvania Economy League. She will moderate a Q&A for the remainder of our time together this morning. Lynne wears multiple hats at PEL, including project manager and communication director. Prior to PEL, she served as the communications director for Lackawanna County, where she was press secretary and handled marketing and communications for the county. She also worked for 20 years as a municipal government and education reporter, receiving several statewide and national awards for her reporting. She earned her BS in newspaper journalism from Syracuse, go Orange, my alma mater as well, and a certificate from Penn State Harrisburg in economic development. Lynne, I will turn it over to you for Q&A. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, LeeAnne. So we do have a couple questions to get us started. The first one is from Marty Patrick, and it's kind of a lengthy question. And I sympathize with this. As LeeAnne said, I'm a project manager. I work in municipalities of all sizes all over the state, and pretty much every municipality has some issue with blight somewhere. So this comes from Williamsport, that is, trying to work on their blight, but is finding difficulties in terms of the third-class city code, and words like dwelling. In other words, dealing with residential blight versus industrial commercial. And there's some specific language he cites in terms of that. And so I don't know who might want to address that. Senator, do you want to kick it off? Are you familiar with this issue at all?
I just asked Mary Beth, and she's not, so I'm not, but we will, Patrick, we will do the digging for you and get back to you on that one.
Winnie or Phyllis, anything? No.
Nothing specific.
All right, so we will find that out, and we will get that out to you one way or another. We will look into that further. Okay. Have that. Okay, can we please get the specific language from Act 33 that requires LLCs to disclose ownership info? Where would that be? Where can they find that easily?
We can certainly provide that to you if you want to put it up on the website afterwards.
And then the follow-up, can local governments deny a permit to an LLC that is affiliated with an LLC with code violations and or tax delinquency.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary Beth. Let me have her jump in here.
So Mary Beth.
Hi, everybody. I'm thinking, and maybe Winnie can help me out with this. She's the legal scholar here on the call, but if they are the owner, if the LLC is the owner of record, and that particular LLC is already violating, in delinquent tax delinquency or water, sewage, municipal utility bills, I would think the answer to that is yes. Am I wrong, Winnie?
I think it'll be a question that has to be resolved, right, with an actual case, right? I think that LLCs are individual entities, and that Act 33 requires information sharing. But when you look closely at it, it's hard to, without more information, like is it a single member LLC, right? If it's one person, that's both LLCs, you got a strong case, right? If it's multiple members in both of the LLCs, it'll be a harder case to make that should be done. But I would certainly say, why not try it, right? And then
I think Winnie's right. I think all the pieces have to line up together and everything, match. And that's the problem with the LLC issue in corporations. The bad guys just know how to play the laws to their advantage and just stay within the law by, that much. And that's the problem for the rest of us trying to deal with this problem.
So
Yeah,
just to follow up on that question a little bit. So if a municipality is in this situation, and I assume, they're going to have their solicitor look, how would they go about resolving this? Where would they look for their resources?
okay, I'll start that one. So let's give an example of there's a judicial sale coming up in a particular county in 2 weeks. 10 days before the sale, a local municipality gets a list of the pre-registered bidders. And on that list of folks that are intending to come to the judicial sale and bid, there's a number of LLCs. So when they registered, the LLCs had to identify the members of the LLC. So the municipality has to look at the registrations, actually physically look at them and see, is there similar members in both? Are we familiar with this organization? Are they bad actors? Do they have a history of noncompliance? And then determine whether or not to contact the county and say, hey, our view of this is that these two LLCs have similar members. They have histories. They have landlord licenses revoked. They have outstanding code violations that really are putting our people in jeopardy. We'd like you to make them not eligible to participate.
So do you go to when you say we would like you, who are you asking?
The
The
tax
court?
claim bureau, the county tax claim bureau to
Oh, the
say,
tax claim
we're
bureau.
not
Okay.
going to allow you to bid at the judicial sale because of your landlord license revocation. And these provisions are in the Pennsylvania real estate tax sale law that
Okay.
give that support those. And if people want some more information on that, I'm happy to share. I think on the Housing Alliance's website, there's maybe a PDF that I did years ago on land banks and real estate tax sales and all the provisions. So happy to share that.
Perfect. The next question has to do with housing authorities. And of course, we have all kinds of different authorities and boards and commissions and everything else in Pennsylvania. And so there might be some confusion about whose role is what role. So do housing authorities have a role in addressing blight?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, of course, the first thing would be to, maintain the properties that you control. But secondly, when you're looking, if you have the resources to expand, a lot of the public housing that I have seen built in my lifetime here in Schuylkill County was on some pretty troubled properties. They didn't build it out in the middle of some farmer's cornfield. The two that I'm the most familiar with in Tamaqua, my old hometown, one was a hotel that had been closed for years. It's now senior apartments, and it really has contributed significantly to the local economy of the downtown. I mean, those are people that go out and shop at the local stores and visit the local, as I get older, I find out I'm going to doctors now all the time. And so, you know, those are the people that are in the downtown, and that's a good thing. Again, I'm sitting here in Monoy City, and I don't remember exactly what was across the street from my office, but I remember taking the bus from Williamsport when I was a college student back home, and whatever was here on the corner, it was, what's the technical term? It was beat up as hell. And so now again, it's a senior high rise, and these are the people that you see in the local stores and restaurants. So yeah, housing authorities can play a really big and positive role in this.
We have another question this is from Charlie Santangelo, sort of on that issue. And it asked about the community block funding, which I know, as Winnie mentioned, CDBG is also often might be the only pot of money that these communities have. Can all enforcement costs qualify for 100% funding from community block grants, is the question. Anyone have an answer?
Does Monoy City run those through? I think some, and maybe the folks from PEL can help out here. Monoy City Borough, do they use their CDBG for their code enforcement program?
I mean, my putting on my PEL hat, my response would be, and we did some CDBG research, would be CDBG is very much a low to mod income program. So I think any enforcement, and this is just me talking off the top of my head, knowing the program, I think the enforcement might have to be in a low to mod area. But if you have and I would say that's not unusual, but I mean, Blight is everywhere. You have lovely neighborhoods that can have one awful house.
Lynn,
But
excuse me, Lynn, sorry.
oh, go ahead, Patty. Patty knows this too. This is Patty Moorhead from the Pennsylvania Economy List.
Hi, Mahanoy City does use some of their county CDBG money to pay for their code enforcement officer. So
There.
And they obviously would be, you know, income eligible if I had to make a guess on that issue.
yeah.
Okay.
You also, Lynn, it brings to mind, it's one of the reasons why Blight can be so expensive. You know, when I said, how in the world does Monoy City need $15 million for demolition? Well, they did their homework. They had the resources to do the study that you had suggested with either, I think they used some high school volunteers as well as groups. They had a map showing every building and Blight. And as you'd indicated, it was one here, it was one here, it was one here. It'd be a lot cheaper if we could just, you know, call in the bulldozers and take down the block. But not everything on the block is blighted. So we don't want to do that, but it would be cheaper. And so when it's scattered throughout the community, that definitely jacks up the cost.
I have a question that I think might be addressed by Act 90, but let me throw it out there. At the state level, has anyone looked into having requirements on buyers for municipal sales be up to date on all their taxes and utilities to prevent individuals from just buying these rundown buildings? Does Act 90 address that?
It's in the real estate tax sale law and probably maybe in the municipal claims and tax liens law too. Allegheny County is they use different, they're not under Retzel or so I'm not sure if they do, but it's common that you couldn't bid and acquire properties at any tax sales if you have outstanding tax claims against you or you owe taxes. And then I think it's municipal utility. So the utility would have to be owned by the municipality in order for that to prevent the person from bidding.
Okay.
And one of the original challenges of dealing with this, and you'd indicated it earlier, we want to be very protective of property rights, but we also understand if there's a bad actor who, and frequently these communities knew who they were because they weren't just in one town, they were doing the same thing in many communities. They can harm the entire neighborhood. And so the challenge in writing these laws was, we didn't want to crack down on somebody's great aunt Millie who, the paint was peeling and all she had was Social Security, and maybe she couldn't afford to go out and hire a painter, and she certainly couldn't do it at 99 years old to get on the ladder herself. And so how do we write the law to apply to everybody's great aunt Millie and still, crack down on the folks that do have the resources that are, allowing their properties to fall into blighted conditions in town after town after town? Because we did find out that they were well known in the communities. They'd say, "Oh yeah, that guy."
Mhm. I think this might be another Act 90 issue, and so I'm gonna. And this question is: are there any tools available to deal with property owners who are either holding companies or owners who reside out of state? And I believe Act 90 does help with that. We can talk about that. And also, is there some sense of an ignorance of Act 90 that maybe it hasn't got? I mean, we do have over 2,500 municipalities in the state. Some of them are really tiny. Do we need to get the word out more about these tools?
We have tried, but I'm sure that, communities hire new solicitors every day. And here in Schuylkill County, some of our solicitors are very, very skilled in utilizing these tools. Again, they probably had to because of the communities that they're working in. But it's an ongoing process. And I think as Mary Beth had indicated, every time we close down one loophole, some very, very skilled bad actor finds another one. And so, I don't know that we're ever going to, wrap up the task force and say, okay, we're done. The work is going to continue.
Yeah, and I would just add that for that, it costs money to use Act 90 to extradite folks from out of state. It requires legal time, your solicitor's time, maybe additional lawyers to make that happen. So the cost is often a burden and a reason why municipalities may not go after that out-of-state owner, because it's expensive and it's complicated. And people that don't want to comply with your local rules that live in California can easily ignore whatever you do with impunity. So trying to figure out how to address these properties before they get so blighted is really the critical piece, because it's very hard to get them once they're out of the jurisdiction, and you have to use those, additional tools to try to bring them into compliance.
Excellent. Do you guys have examples of partnerships between municipalities and the community, like foundations, et cetera, that have gotten involved with this blight issue and helped on the funding end?
In Tamaqua, they're now moving ahead on another segment of a 30-year downtown revitalization effort. And when I asked the representative who had come back with some of the money, it's going to include a community center, a police department. I think the local fire department is making some additions. I said, well, it's an RCAP. That requires a 50% match. And I said, I know the borough of Tamaqua, borough council isn't sitting on a pile of money. And they said, oh, no. We had a private foundation that provided the other 50%. And what was intriguing, the Morgan Foundation was so committed to the idea of the downtown coming back. They said, we will only provide the match to you if you do it on this one very visible, heavily traveled, blighted downtown block. And so, they get it. And again, they could have built it at the end of town, up on top of the mountain. Instead, they said, no, we want it here. And so, yeah, I would definitely reach out to the private foundations, because again, this is never going to come as a shock. Even though we're having a really good budget year, this money isn't going to last forever. And so we're always going to need partners.
Just one more example, in the city of Johnstown, the Community Foundation for the Alleghenies has been very active in their Vision 2025, which includes a full blight component. And they've been a great funder of demolition and other blight mitigation strategies in Johnstown.
I have a question on deceased owners, which I'm sure is a problem, right? How can you move forward on these blighted owners when the owner is deceased and the estate gets tied up sometimes for years? You get delinquent taxes. Any property is a serious threat. What do you recommend in that situation?
Well, I'll jump in and start. The first thing you want to do is, if you can resolve it with the heirs, that's the easiest way. So first would be find all the heirs, try to see if you can have them deed the property over to an entity, whether it's a land bank, the municipal government, some nonprofit organization that does this. So first is try to resolve it that way. Then the other alternative, which you can read about, and I've never done this or seen an example of folks doing it, but in Blight to Bright, there's a discussion of opening estates of deceased property owners to transfer the blighted properties. And that's a special power that redevelopment authorities have. So if you want to pull up this resource is on the Housing Alliance's website. It's like a blight Bible, and it just goes over all of the tools. And one of them is opening the estates of deceased property owners to do that. And they talk about how to do it.
Any other thoughts on that one? Okay, this is an interesting question. What are your thoughts on a vacant property tax to promote movement in either development or sale of vacant properties, but also using those tax funds as your primary funding source for any demo or redevelopment? And I'd like to add on sort of to that idea. I frequently deal with municipalities that are struggling in terms of getting sort of ordinances and stuff on vacant and vacant, blighted. They struggle a lot. One of their big concerns that seems to be a big concern is what do you do in terms of fees? These fees have sometimes been challenged, can be challenged in court. So in terms of all of that, sort of what municipalities could do, there is not a vacant property tax available at the moment, and I don't know if the legislature senator has any appetite for that, or if there are other tools. So do you want to start out with that idea?
I mean, I'll take a look at it. I'll tell you that I've been trying to find a better way to fund the public schools for 20 years than the property tax we have. And, it's the equivalent of banging my head against the wall. And so I'm not in any way going to tell you it's easy, but we will take a look at it. Legally, there are going to be some complications. I did my doctoral dissertation on many years ago on the Keystone Opportunity Zones that allow essentially, no taxes on this spot, and which can really help a community. But it also gets the people across the street very upset when they're paying their taxes. And the lawyers tried to explain that one to me in excruciating detail. And I basically, I think in my dissertation, put it into one sentence and said, stay tuned until the Supreme Court comes down on that one. But yeah, that's something we could take a look at.
The other thing too, if I can just add something somewhat related, I know there are municipalities, I guess by local ordinance, that do a vacant property registry. And Representative Tim Twardzik has a bill in the House right now to create a statewide vacant property registry. And I know there are some fees attached the longer a property sits vacant. I believe he has a structured fee-based, the longer it sits vacant, you know, the owner would be required to pay an assessment to the municipality. I don't know off the top of my head what the amounts are, or if there's a dedicated source that the money goes to, or if it can just go in the municipality's general fund. I don't know that, but I believe there is money attached to that as well. That I think at the moment is out of committee in the House. It might be on first or second consideration over there. So there is some money and some funding attached to that as well.
Yeah, I think calling it a fee instead of a tax and making it be connected to registration is also a key to moving it forward, right? And really, the value is in having the information, right? So you need the data to go after the folks that own the vacant and blighted, but you also don't want to impose additional costs on a property owner who's trying to sell the property or bring it up to code. So I know that that bill that Marianne or Mary Beth referred to has an escalating scale of registration fees, and there are exemptions for folks that have their properties on the market or people who are in the military who are owners. So that would be a good bill to take a look at. I think it's HB 1791.
Okay, perfect. So I think we're going to do, is there any last question that somebody is burning to ask?
Yeah, if you have one last question, throw it in the
last call.
chat. I'll jump in for you, Lynn. Senator Argall, Mary Beth, Winnie, Phyllis, and Lynn, thank you so much for your participation today, for your insights and information, and truthfully for the work that you're doing to address blight in the state. Thank you for the great chat. Honestly, there were a lot of resources and discussion that took place in the chat as well. We will capture that and those resources and put those up on our website. PEL's website is pelcentral.org, pelcentral.org. So you can check there for more information after our discussion today. Again, thank you very much for participating in our issues forum this morning. We appreciate all of the insights from the participants as well as from our speakers, and appreciate your time this morning. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.